In the north, they thought they knew all there was to know of war. Until the War of the Rift. While the Southern King hid, warm in his keep, the Darkwings cut their bloody trail from frozen north to winter's edge. Alone, the Warden and his small garrison turned their whiskers to the icy wind. At the end of hope, in a last barrage, they wiped Batkind from the land and memory. With no sign of the Darkwings' return, in time, few believed them little more than a fairy's tale. But at Mount Cauldron, time had been all they needed. An old enemy claws free of their icy tomb and hungers for vengeance. But not all is lost. King Rattus brings north a cause for hope. A bastard prince, placed in the paws of the Warden of the Wastes to raise as his own. A secret of blood never to be told. Now, fate calls for a hero in a murderous screech, and one young rat will answer. The stomp of his father's boots on the stair was how every morning began for Arlo. The booming shout to ready himself was louder still, but such was Lord Eivor's zeal at a new day. Dawn was breaking over winter's edge, and Arlo was yet to miss one. The castle echoed with the horns of the returning hunters, bringing their night's bounty. Arlo's little heart quickened to hear it. The only thrill to be found inside the high walls was a hunter's tales of what lay beyond them. Arlo tells himself it's a good life here in Winter's Edge. The bustling of contented ratfolk, the crisp mountain air, and without the endless scourge of frogs the southerners suffer. Why should he want for more? There was no time for tales of the hunt today. Lord Eivor was already dividing what was an excellent haul, happy to see his people provided for. Arlo longed only to join the hunt, to see the ratdom or even the lands beyond. His father called it a fool's wish. Arlo's destiny was unshakable, much like the keep that would become his by birthright. Krunk was a rat's rat, with no interests beyond his forge. If you have the parts, this Mastercraft's rat can make armor and weapons that would see off a sky scorcher bite, or so he claims. Arlo wondered how well they'd do against something that wasn't a myth. Chief Mason Leaf was the rat Arlo most admired. As younger brother to Lord Eivor, his carefree uncle never faced the burden of being Warden of the Wastes. With walls this strong, his duties were light, leaving him plenty of time for his nephew. Tiki's shop was perhaps Arlo's favorite, as the shopkeeper had wares from far and wide. But getting him to part with his curiosities was never easy. Arlo has no memory of his mother, but Hilda's food was a true taste of maternal kindness. With the right ingredients, she would make meals nourishing to body and soul. The hunters had brought unwelcome news. A family of the reviled creatures ratfolk called backstabbers had moved into the wastes. Eivor told his son to fetch his weapons. His father had no explanation for suddenly taking Arlo on a hunt. It even gave the hunters pause. Arlo had been taught to fight, and better than most. But rarely had he been tested. He was determined to prove himself. The rugged terrain of the outskirts could have taken all day to traverse, but Arlo's trusty grappling hook allowed him to swing between its many crevices. Arlo liked the feel of a sharp axe cutting through the vines. The wilds were part of his home, and nothing in them would frighten him. The famous frostberry bushes of the wastes were in full fruit already. Their juice made a healthy tonic, though Lord Eivor preferred them fermented. His father was a sturdy rat, built for strength, not speed. So Arlo found it curious that he challenged him to a race. The prospect of the hunt had filled Lord Eivor with a vigor that his son had not seen in years, or at least since breakfast. A warden fights the hardest battles, he told Arlo, and needs the sharpest blade. With that, Eivor gifted Arlo his own sharpening whetstone. Whether these beasts were named for their spines or for some past unforgivable deed, no rat knew. Either way, Arlo was about to find himself at the pointy ends of this brood. Even young backstabber red attacks were brutal, but a well-timed dodge would see Arlo escape unscathed. This backstabber lived up to its name with its deadly white attack. But Arlo's shield could block the deadly spikes. This young one used vicious yellow attacks. Arlo had to time his parries perfectly. This mother had left her young to fight alone, but the same could not be said of Lord Eivor as he leapt to his son's side. It was Lord Eivor's mighty blade that took her head, but the fight was won together. Arlo basked in his father's pride, almost as warm as at the fire inside Winter's Edge. Triumphant and keen to tell the tale of his son's victories, Lord Eivor set to a night of drinking with the elders. Arlo was reluctant to return to his bed, wondering how long he must wait to hunt again. The booming footsteps that woke him this time were nothing like those of his father. Found his father. The warden stood alone, holding back a whole Darkwing army, their cruel Count Kazak leading them. His father charged, but the Darkwing Count was as fast as he was strong. The Winter's crown tumbled to Arlo's feet, now without a head to rest on. There was no time to grieve his father, as from above the Count revealed his greatest weapon, a sky scorcher. Not a fairy's tale, but an undead beast whose very breath could level kingdoms. And its eye was trained on Arlo. All that came next was a fog of bloodlust, snapping jaws, and the beating of leathery wings. there could be no victory. Arlo awoke, groggy and warm to his father's shouts. Only he wasn't in bed. The warmth was from the fire that had engulfed Winter's Edge, and the shouts were his uncle's. The only other survivor of the Darkwing attack, Leaf was bruised and his hind paws barely steady. He'd seen villagers flee to the outskirts. Arlo knew it was up to him to make them safe. He'd know these anywhere. Krunk's smithy hammer and Hilda's chef's knife. Arlo wondered why they would leave them here. With the attack at Winter's Edge, no hunters had come to check their traps. Arlo thought he might find a use for them. Arlo had found the reason his friends had fled. The taunting shrieks revealed that this was Baron Frostovic, son of the Darkwing who took his father, and therefore a perfect target for his revenge. His foe was beaten, but seeing what had been inflicted on Hilda and Krunk, Arlo's need for vengeance was only growing. Suddenly wished to be within the walls of Winter's Edge, to hear the boot and boom of his father at dawn, A sound he realized he'd never hear again. He needed to return to whatever was left and make his plan. Spent from his journey, Arlo fell into his father's chair, the one thing still standing in the ashy ruin. It was his chair now, along with the title of Warden of the Wastes. Arlo's shoulders slumped at the weight of it, but only for a moment. The dark wings had nearly scorched the ratdom to ash before, and now it was for him to stop them. He was going to rebuild Winter's Edge, a beacon of hope from which to drive back the shadow. This much Arlo knew. No rat would rebuild Winter's Edge on an empty stomach. The kitchen had to be fixed and stocked. Leaf suggested Arlo visit the Night Eyes of the Golden Forest, known for their hearty food. Arlo hoped rat wasn't the key. The smoke had attracted help in the unlikely form of a pirate. Captain Blacktail had seen many towns razed in his years, usually by his own paw, a fact he chose not to mention as he offered his services. The ship King Rattus's Revenge would take the young warden wherever he had need to go. The autumnal gold canopy glimmered in the sunlight, held high by the silver boughs. There there was no denying the wonder of the Golden Forest. The peace Arlo found beneath the leaves was not to last. A shrill cry cut through the calm, a call for help. The hoots came from inside the bug farm, along with a stench of pond scum and villainy. A frog trap. Grateful for her rescue, Erica the Ranger offered to guide Arlo to the hidden village of Nestminster. Nestminster's entrance was guarded. Under their helmet, the eyes of the guards seemed to glow. Was he prey walking into a hunter's camp? Arlo could not help but gasp at the sight. He had never seen a place so ornately crafted. It was nothing like the cold stone of home. The Parliament was deep in session when Erica and Arlo entered. The Night-Eye elders listened, still as statues, to the pleading of a chef whose daughter Frey was missing. Erica threw herself forward, proclaiming she would rescue the chef's daughter and needed no help. Then she was gone, leaving Arlo to face the elders alone. The elders' staring eyes unnerved Arlo, but when they asked him to protect Erica, he did not refuse. Frey's father told them she wanted fish for a new soup recipe. He told her never to go to the dangerous Moonlight Pond, but she was stubborn as she was brave. The chef handed Arlo a few poison antidotes without explanation. Arlo wondered what could go in soup that would have him so scared. Erica said they must be as stealthy as the owls of old. She gave him a bow carved from the silver boughs, quiet as a whisper, deadly as a talon. A white feather. Erica knew it was Frey's. They were on the right path. A frog scouting party squatted in the mushroom farm. Arlo's arrows would make swift work of them. The farmers emerged, shaken but grateful. Arlo had never met stripe snouts before. Badger brothers Marco and Lorenzo's keen eyes had seen Frey go by, headed for the pond. At Moonlight Pond, Frey was already preparing to leave. Her hunt, it seemed, was not done. With a hoot about an egg, she was gone. The farmer card. What it lacks in power, it makes up for in its positive qualities. The sky flashed with a blinding light. Suddenly, towering before him stood an imposing figure, his flaming sword heating the air around Arlo. Thrusting his sword into the air, the stranger imparted his gift onto the young warden. Arlo could feel the stranger's gift pulsing through his body, filling him with a burning desire to avenge his father and rid the North of the Darkwing scum. Tunnels are rarely used by Night Eyes, who prefer an open sky above. Arlo knew dangerous creatures lurked in such dark places. found a whole nest of eggs. She was uninterested in who the owner might be, but the mother slither scale was very interested in her. Side by side, Erica and Arlo forced the slither scale from its lair. Erica would not leave Frey to travel alone. They would see him back at the Parliament. Erica and Frey held wings as they asked Arlo and the elders for their blessing. They wanted to leave and start their own kitchen at Winter's Edge. All agreed. Arlo hoped slither scale eggs would not be on the menu. Arlo was keen to head home, but an owl called Sigrid stopped him. As Chancellor, she had a budget for someone to deal with the local slither scale problem. If he wanted the job, he best join her in the Rangers Guild. The owls called for Arlo's help. A ranger had gone to hunt a slither scale. He was seeking vengeance for a slither scale attack that took his family, but Arlo would not let the young ranger go the same way. Arlo had heard the sniffling of the heron leagues away. Ernest was the most skilled fisherman in the ratdom, or had been. In between sobs, he told Arlo he'd dropped his best rod in a well. The warden offered to find it, if only to stop the noise. Arlo found the ranger was already locked in battle with the slither scale. He would not survive long fighting alone. The young ranger was a fierce fighter, but no match for the slither scale. He barely thanked Arlo for helping him in this fight before he took off, seeking another. leave him to fight alone. There was no stopping him until the Slither Scale was defeated. The Slither Scale's lair. They would end its tyranny here and now. The Slither Scale was defeated at last. The young ranger took no spoils, and with only a brief hoot of thanks, he was gone. Arlo hoped the ranger's thirst for revenge was finally sated. Owls were worried, which was a rare sight. A Slither Scale nest was nearby with a fresh clutch of eggs. The nest had to be destroyed before they hatched and unleashed chaos. Too late. The nest was a writhing snare of Slither Scale. If any escaped, who knew how many would fall prey to them? Arlo would not let that happen. The blaze destroyed the last of the nest. Arlo had no time to rest. The Slither Scale had returned. With the Slither Scale defeated, the forest settled into tranquility once more. rebuilt walls would not keep Winter's Edge safe alone. They needed weapons and armor, but had no smith. Leif knew of a master crafter living in the rift, if Arlo was of an open mind. Arlo had heard the tales of battles that scarred the rift at his father's knee. He wondered how much of the stories could be true. The ancestral home to the pond scum, the rift had seen endless war between rats, bats, and frogs. Even the river refused to pass through it now. Its muddy bed was grave to beasts and boats alike. Arlo's foot slipped on something that was not another bone. Bottles were littering the muddy path now. Whoever left them could not be far. More bottles lay outside the forge, which was otherwise as quiet as every other dead thing that haunted this place. The pile of bottles was large, even for one who drinks like a merman, and it seemed to be breathing. Arlo was amazed the merman could swing his hammer, let alone see who he was hitting. A couple of thumps on the head soon brought him to his senses. Following him inside, Arlo realized this must be the smith. But his furnace was as cold and broken as the merman's spirit. The smith hunted bottles as he told Arlo of his woes. The frogs had attacked the village, kidnapping his wife and apprentice daughters. He would not light his forge until they were home. This was a problem Arlo swore he could solve. The smith took some strength from this. He introduced himself as Ron and flashed a grin, telling Arlo the frogs didn't take everything. hardly a full armory, Ron had what was needed. This two-handed skull crusher was a gift made by his daughters. He put it in Arlo's paws in hope it would help save them. Together, the pair ventured on, heading towards the frog camp situated in the ruined temples. At the top of the pile of corpses was one that was not Frog. The smith let out a desperate cry at the sight of his wife, lifeless atop the pile. He cried out again, but this time it was a call for blood. old rat that stood before Arlo was barely able to raise his head, and his one cloudy eye felt as though it was looking through the warden. As Arlo reached out his paw, the hooded rat slammed his spear into the ground, imparting his gift onto the young warden. Arlo was glad to have met the old rat. Although he looked old and feeble, Arlo was sure that he was more than capable of looking after himself. Before Arlo could act, Ron was in the clutches of the enemy. Approaching the statue, Arlo could feel the familiar buzz of power coursing through his body once again. As he left the statue, Arlo could feel a new power coursing through his body. Something else came his way. Tumbling down the temple stair, Arlo was met with another horror. The head of the smith. It was Arlo now who took up the battle cry. how many friends, old and new, lay dead, he still had more to do. Rita and Ruby were free, but without their father, there was little for them here. Arlo offered them a new home at Winter's Edge and a forge to continue in their father's footsteps. The mermaids were grateful and said they would find their way to the keep once they had laid Ron to rest. A stranger was meditating in the stillness. Arlo gasped. It was a frog. Before he could lift his blade, the frog croaked that he was an outcast, named Short Tongue. He'd come to rebuild the ancestral home of Bogmire Forge, a place for frogs who sought peace. No sooner had they agreed a truce than the two warriors had to fight. Side by side, the pair fought well, and the attackers soon disappeared again, back into thin air. Persuaded of the frog's honesty, Arlo left Short Tongue to his quest for peace. In return, the frog swore Arlo would always find a warm welcome there. gifted at finding shiny treasures, but had lost her precious silver spectacles. Without them, she could not even count the claws on her paws. She begged for the warden's help. Winter's Edge bustled again, but now with folk from across the north. All were in need of homes and work. Leaf suggested a new builder's yard would solve both problems. The yard needed a builder, and Arlo knew who to ask. Some rats protest at any change to their view. None more so than the elder at Mossbug Farm. If a builder was near, he would know. The glimmer in the dirt revealed an ancient runestone, perhaps fallen from one of the pillars that encircled this tomb. The runestone slipped into place. Arlo wondered which tale was true, that treasure lay within, or some ancient horror. On hearing that Arlo was warden, the old rat was quick to report a beaver had moved onto the hill, rebuilding the old shack, and that maybe Arlo should check his permits. These farmers had been to the shack to trade with the beaver, but found no sign. Perhaps, like these rat folk, something else had found him first. The sky once again burned bright with a flashing light, but this time it was accompanied by an eerie laugh. Before the warden stood a slender rat, his lips still curled from laughter. As Arlo went to question the stranger, he clapped his paws together, imparting his gift onto the warden. Although Arlo was grateful for the gift, he could not ignore the feeling that this stranger was using him as part of some intricate plan. At the shack, the only clue was a tuft of fur and half-chewed logs, until he heard a snarl that stood Arlo's fur on end. A backstabber pup. The pup's nest would not be far. Arlo feared for the beaver's fate. Lay unmoving, another death on his conscience. The culprit stood before him. Arlo did not have his father to aid him. This time he would fight alone. The backstabber lay defeated, and Arlo paid his respects to the beaver, who leapt up at Arlo's paw. Playing dead had spared his life. A chance to work and live at Winter's Edge brought a sparkle to Billy Beaver's eye. He could not wait to get his teeth into the stone of the mighty keep. Arlo hoped he did not mean it literally. Billy Beaver in place, work could start on the builder's yard. With enough materials and gold, Arlo would make Winter's Edge a place beyond his father's dreams. news from the docks. A hunter had arrived in the night, badly injured and seeking help from the warden. The young hunter was unsteady on his paws and seemed afraid. Leaf bid him tell his tale. Tuck and his family were royal hunters. They had been sent by the king to the rift, but met with disaster. At the temple ruins, a strange creature from the sky had taken his father and brother. Arlo made for the temple ruins once more. The Darkwings returning so soon troubled him. He hoped the rotting corpses of frogs he'd left to fester had not been the cause. Something sparkled in the mud under the bridge. Perhaps in finding a treasure here, she had let this one fall. In the distance, Arlo could make out the silhouette of a solitary hunter. Maybe this was the rat he was looking for. ranger proclaimed he was Robin of Longtail, first hunter to the king. He had escaped the Darkwings, and glad to know Tuck was safe, but he would not leave while his youngest, Little John, was still captive. These creatures were doing more than raiding. There was no chance to explain as dark shadows swooped down upon them. The ranger proclaimed he was Robin of Longtail, first hunter to the king. He had escaped the Darkwings, and glad to know Tuck was safe, but he would not leave while his youngest, Little John, was still captive. These creatures were doing more than raiding. There was no chance to explain as dark shadows swooped down upon them. Ruins were near. Arlo would waste no time on more talking. He would not be too late this time. Frog corpses were here still, but strangely rearranged. The Darkwings had indeed come for the dead and were using them for some nefarious purpose. Arlo's stomach churned. They came to the top of the ruins. They saw Little John. His smile at the sight of his father was the last he ever made. In a flash of bad teeth, his young life was ended. Robin's rage was terrible. He charged at the Darkwing, unleashing a hail of arrows. Together, they defeated the beast in a fury that sent all other bats from the ruin in terror. Robin was bereft. It was meant to be a simple hunt. He could not understand these flying abominations. Arlo offered what solace he could. Tuck was at Winter's Edge, where Robin could take some rest. Villagers had come from the outskirts seeking an audience. Arlo doubted they brought good news. The villagers told a harrowing tale. The Darkwings had returned in the night. The bat's thirst for destruction was not sated at Winter's Edge. Now, the outskirts needed his help. The shouts of fleeing villagers and the smell of burning bug stock greeted Arlo as he approached Mossbug Farm. It was already overrun. Back of her Scorchling, the Darkwing General screeched her orders. This one would pay for the death of her son. They turned their evil eyes on Arlo. Was drenched in Darkwing blood, but the farm was free of their filth. Robin freed the farm elder, but he was not the only prisoner. The Darkwings had taken more villagers to the castle ruin on the hill. A familiar flash filled the sky, but this time it made Arlo's fur stand on end. The biggest rat Arlo had ever seen stood before him holding a hammer that no mortal could lift, let alone swing. Before Arlo could talk, the giant lifted his hammer into the air and passed his gift to the warden. Arlo could feel the stranger's gift bouncing around inside his body. A much-needed boost of energy in his quest to rid the North of Darkwings. At the castle, Arlo could hear the terrified squeaks of the villagers chained inside. Only the Darkwing General had the key, and she would not hand it over alive. Arlo needed no more reason to kill her. The villagers were safe for now. Arlo asked if they would help at the farm. The bug milk needed to flow again. Supplies were still low. Frey wanted Winter's Edge to start their own farm, but they would need a farmer fit for a keep. Everyone knows the Night Eyes of the Golden Forest had the best farmers. Or so she said. The elders had no time for the troubles of rat folk. They had troubles of their own. They told him to ask the Badger brothers. Arlo had liked the striped snouts and set off to find them. Approaching the mushroom farm, Arlo could hear Marco's voice calling in alarm for his brother. The warden's work, it seemed, was never done. Lorenzo had gone underground foraging for rare mushrooms but had not returned. Marco was sure something had happened. Arlo offered his help at once. The carved stumps of a mushroom patch. Lorenzo had come this way. Arlo hoped that, perhaps for once, this meant his quarry was safe and well and not in mortal peril. This must be Lorenzo's basket. Why had he dropped it? Arlo moved faster, certain luck had once again abandoned him. Lorenzo had passed out in the mushrooms, drunk on spores. Arlo smiled with relief. He knew only one thing would wake him. A stink bug. The bug farm might have what he needed. Lorenzo could sleep safely here until he returned. Arlo hoped the stink bug smell would not linger on him. The sooner he got to the sleeping Lorenzo, the better. Lorenzo was gone. In his place stood a hooded Night-Eye. He said the striped snout was being treated by a healer at the shrine, an honor not to be disturbed. Arlo did not like the glint in this owl's eye. He was warden and would disturb whomever he saw fit. The Night-Eyes circled the shrine. As Arlo looked closer, he saw Lorenzo, blood pouring from his arm. This strange cult of owls were no healers. Defeated, the Elder drew something from his cloak. Lorenzo's arm. He swallowed it whole. Arlo soon wished that had been the worst of it. the were-owl was dead, and Arlo woke Lorenzo, who was as afraid as he was pained. Arlo sent the scared badger home where his brother was waiting to help him. Arlo returned to the mushroom farm, anxious to check on the Badger brothers. Grateful for the young warden's rescue, they offered to work the farm at Winter's Edge as soon as Lorenzo's wounds were healed. Rita had asked for this audience with the warden as her father's tools were losing their power. Arlo offered use of his father's whetstone, but she said the power came from the god's blessing. She needed to take them to the shrine in the rift. The rift was a dangerous place, and he had little desire to return. Neither did Rita, but he would not see her go alone. The merfolk believe the 8 arms bring balance to life and death. or so Rita explained as they approached the shrine. Arlo's little head disliked such weighty thoughts. He thought about lunch instead. So delighted was Maggie at the return of her spectacles, she even offered Arlo her rarest treasure of all, a very small discount. At the shrine, Rita realized she had forgotten the ritual. She needed a druid's help, or it would all be for nothing. She pointed to the old ruins. Could Arlo find the druid who lived there? A trail of herbs seemed to be leading him to the druid. Arlo wondered what magics they made. Druid's coat of needles can see off most attacks, but these frogs seemed to feel no pain. Thanking Arlo, the druid agreed to help with the ritual. But it could not be done without a special plant from the ruined tower. Throwing Arlo their tower key, they made for the shrine. There was no sign of this powerful plant at the tower. All Arlo found was an open hatch. Perhaps its power let it grow in the dark. What Arlo found was a mole. His father had told him of these creatures who lived in sprawling underground villages, but this one was alone. Perhaps he'd seen the druid's plant. To his surprise, the mole said he grew it for tea and would be happy to share. However, nothing was ever simple. It was behind a bunker door and the fuse had blown. If Arlo found a new fuse, he could have all the... Arlo had no idea what kind of door problem could not be solved with an axe. But he remembered an object in the smith's stash that might be what the mole was looking for. was confusing to Arlo how such a small object could open such large doors. He would have to remember to return to ask one day. The mole squeaked happily as he slotted the fuse into a strange contraption. Arlo gasped as the room buzzed, bringing light without any flame. Nearby came the sound of metal doors scraping open. With the plant in paw, he promised to return one day for the offered cup of tea, a use for the plant which Arlo resolved not to tell the druid. The druid already knew the tea recipe and directed Arlo to drop the plant in the cauldron, smacking their lips in excitement. Arlo wondered if his troubles had been for a magic herb or a tasty drink. Arlo had hoped for a well-earned nap during the ritual, but it seems even the dead do not rest during rituals in the rift. Arlo had to keep them from the druid. Ritual over, the dead rested once more. Rita thanked the druid, and Arlo suggested they return with them, but they refused. They were headed home to try their plant in a brownie recipe. Short-Tongue shouted at Arlo's approach. The tail-spinner queen had taken frogs captive to feed her young. Arlo did not hesitate. This was a fate he wouldn't wish on even his worst enemy. The Council card. This card brings balance to any deck. The Death card. A harbinger of bad tidings. They crept up on the eight-legged monstrosity as she ensnared another frog in her webs. The webbing was thick and tough, but their blades soon cut them to ribbons. Short-Tongue sent the terrified frog toward Bogmire Forge. Injured though she was, the queen had no intention of giving up her hunt. Her young hungered. Another villager freed. They too headed for Bogmire, and Arlo wondered how many more frogs it could take. A dank and unsettling place. It had to be the Queen's lair. Arlo wondered what his father would say if he could see him risking his life for frogs. The tail spinner queen was dead, and the frogs were soon at work rebuilding the village. The warden was sure mammalian-amphibian relations would be forever changed. Tuck had settled in well at Winter's Edge. So much so he planned to stay and open his own shop. He hoped Arlo might help him collect rare items to help draw in ratfolk from far and wide. The young rat was excited. He had worked out exactly what he needed and asked if Arlo would meet him in the outskirts. Arlo was glad to see Tuck's spirits finally lifted and could not refuse him. At Mossbug Farm, Arlo started to regret his hasty offer of help. The farmer had seen a beast, and shouting something about luring it with bloodfruit, he went to hide in terror. Tuck grinned. He knew exactly where to go. The statue before Arlo pulsed with a familiar power and soon began to fill his body with elemental energy. A newfound strength rushed through Arlo's body, making his fur stand on end. Arlo found Tuck at the bottom of Blackfoot Caverns, the fruit he needed just out of his reach. Arlo's bow would make quick work of this. The bloodfruit burst open as it landed on the cavern floor, and seemingly in the next second came the terrible sound of beating wings. fruit in hand, Tuck asked Arlo to come to Longfang Castle, where they would set their trap. It was eerily quiet at the ruins. Tuck had everything ready for the trap. It only needed Arlo to toss the blood fruit into the cooking pot. The stench would be sure to attract the beast. They only needed to wait. A high-pitched shriek pierced through Arlo's dreams, and soon the flapping of wings was upon them. Tuck asked if Arlo could carve its beak from the beast's remains, the perfect centerpiece for his new shop. The young rat could barely contain his excitement and ran off, keen to find the builder at Winter's Edge, now able to build the shop of his dreams. cook's emporium was indeed a marvel, with items for hunting, ingredients for cooking and smithing, and a tale of adventure for all who asked about the great beak on display. Arlo was sure he would be returning often. Ranger had come from distant White Whisker. Gray Ears told the tale of a Darkwing camp sending raids on the rabbit village. Arlo swore he would send the bats back to their evil ice mountain. Before Arlo could set sail, he was stopped by Robin the Ranger. If Arlo planned to go north to fight the Darkwings, he was not going alone. At the docks of White Whisker, Gray Ears bid them to come speak to the elder of the village. The rabbit's body was old and frail, but his mind was sharp. The Darkwings had made camp on Whiskers Peak. Their attack would come soon, unless someone took the fight to them. As the pair traveled towards the peaks at the edge of White Whisker, the Bat's ice castle slowly came into view. Arlo knew in his heart that one day he must take his battle there. They had no choice but to fight their way to the camp leader. Defeating him would break the Bat's spirit. Seemed to stir the very air into fury. This was not the wind, but the beating of leathery wings. The camp leader was defeated, but they had to warn the rabbits. Darkwings were on their way. Gray Ears and the Elder were looking for the source of that terrible screech, but there was no time to explain. Arlo shouted to Gray Ears to get the villagers to the boats. He and Robin drew their weapons. Gray Ears and the other rabbits were safe, but terrified. Arlo offered them refuge and a warm welcome at Winter's Edge. Arlo was as good as his word. He welcomed the rabbits, proud to offer Winter's Edge as a new home for as long as they wished. Gray Ears thanked the warden for his hospitality, but the droop of his ears and whiskers told Arlo there was a great weight on the rabbit's mind. The ranger could not contain his anger. The Darkwings had taken the warren, the rabbit's ancestral home. He could not rest here while they spread their filth there. The warden swore they'd reclaim it together. The ranger was fueled by his fury, barely pausing on their journey for food or rest. Arlo thought it almost matched his own. What once was a small village was now a foul Darkwing base, with all they needed to launch attacks all across the north. And the ranger fought tooth and paw, bow and blade, to drive back the bat filth. Kazak had sent one of his strongest generals, Necromancer Guraz. His defeat would rob the bats of a great weapon. The warren was safe in Rabbit Paws once more. Gray Ears swore that if the Warden of the Wastes ever called for help, the rabbits would answer. Edge, the rabbits celebrated that their homes were safe once more. They longed to feel the crunch of snow under paw. Despite all Arlo had done, the Darkwing threat was still growing. The North was running out of time. He told Leaf to call the War Council. Tomorrow they would make their plan. Arlo could not sleep a whisker. He wished more than anything that his father were here to tell him what to do. The nervous chatter silenced at Arlo's entrance. He did not sweeten the truth. The Darkwing numbers grew. They would return, and Winter's Edge could not stop them alone. He called Robin forward. Arlo was raised on tales of how the North could not rely on Southern kings. But he was desperate. The Ranger was sure King Reggie would prove different. Ordering the council to prepare for war, they set course for the Crimson Keep. The Crimson Keep's dock was the greatest Arlo had seen. Robin explained it was built by master craftsmoles. He laughed, telling Arlo how Ratfolk believed their king paid them by fighting huge warrior moles in an underground arena. The king's steward, Doug, stopped them before the throne room. He started at the news of war and then rushed away, muttering about how the armor would need to be polished. Dennis, the king's brother, was also curious to see this northerner. Dennis missed war. He could plainly see by Arlo's expression that was the warden's task. He hoped they could fight together someday. was nervous to meet this king. He hoped Reggie lived up to all he'd heard from Robin. He did not have to wait long. King Reggie was glad to see his old friend Robin was safe and bid him to tell his tale. Robin told of the death of his son by the ferocious Darkwings and begged the king prepare his forces to go north. Reggie was sad at the loss of Little John, but said that was not reason enough for the South to join a northern war. The king wished them well and turned to go. Arlo stepped forward, asking what the king would do when there was no Winter's Edge to shield the South. If they sent no help now, the Darkwings would not stop at their borders. Reggie listened to Arlo tell his tale. It brought back terrible memories of a father lost and a land left in ruin. A tale not unlike this young warden's. He held out his paw in friendship. King and warden, united, could stop any foe. The southern ratfolk would not simply leave the warmth of their homes for frozen lands they had never seen. A trial by combat would prove his worth. Arlo agreed. He would do whatever it took. News had spread swiftly. As Reggie led them to the tournament grounds, the streets were already full. Villagers craned their necks to see their warrior king and this strange northern challenger. Doug was an unlikely opponent for the first round. His small stature made it hard for him to wield a sword. But when it came to fighting for his king, Doug stood 10 paws tall. No match for Arlo's superior skill. Reggie could already see this would be a tournament that they would squeak of through the ages. Dennis, veteran of the Green Ward's War and captain of the Royal Guard, would be a true challenge for Arlo. The crowd's cheers for the king's brother echoed off the arena walls. A veteran too, used to fighting monsters and Darkwings with ice under paw. Dennis did not compare. Now the crowd cheered for him. Arlo's final opponent was the king himself. Reggie had seen off the frog invaders almost single-pawed and was beloved by his subjects. This fight would be a tale for their times. In stature and skill, there was not a whisker between them. They shook paws in truce. No rat could doubt Arlo's worth now. Reggie said to meet him by the docks. Together, they would wipe out the Dark Wings once and for all. Together, they would attack Mount Cauldron. Seeing the king's forces training for battle, Arlo felt the stirrings of something he'd long thought dead in his heart. Hope. At the dock, Arlo's little heart leapt again at the strange contraption. If it was a boat or a house, he could not tell, nor why it had a giant sleeping fuzzlebug atop it. From inside emerged King Reggie. He was not alone. King Reggie introduced Bertle. Arlo felt something comforting in the turtle's presence. Bertle was proud to take the army to Mount Cauldron in his bug ship. They would make camp at Highland View, where Arlo could find them when his forces were ready. In a flap of its wings and a cloud of gas, the fuzzlebug took King Reggie and his army north. Whatever tasks Arlo had to finish, now was the time. Winter's Edge, Arlo told Leaf to gather all the clans. Tomorrow, they would make their war. Arlo went to bed, for once without despair. The king and the warden's forces together would make a last stand. They would sing of it forever. He wondered what sort of tale it would be. The clan's leaders listened to the warden and king's plan. They were nervous of this flying contraption, but their fear was as nothing compared to their iron will. They would take the mountain, the Sky Scorcher, and Count Kazak himself. Raising their weapons in salute, Arlo was glad to see his friends united, though the feeling was bittersweet. It seemed impossible all would return. King Reggie's camp had creatures of every clan armed and ready to fight. At its heart, Ertl waited. Arlo felt again the sense of safety at the turtle and took it as a good omen. Ertl bellowed the order, and they felt the ground fall away. The ship lurched, as did the soldiers' stomachs. They held their nerve. Against the bats, they would need it. They landed with a thud. Arlo loved mountains, or had loved the thought of them in the great tales of far away. But this one he did not like at all. Its icy wind chilled more than his fur. They made hasty camp, readying themselves for the fight, keeping busy to stop the frost from biting. So it began. Side by side, the king and the warden hacked a path through the bats to the walls of Cauldron Castle. The way was shut, barred and guarded. Leathery wings beat all around. If they could not open the gate, it would be all for nothing. Reggie sounded his horn. Out of the icy haze came Dennis, a barrel on his back, its fuse lit. The king had come prepared. The gate was shattered with a boom that echoed across the mountainside. It was a hammer blow to their enemies' hearts. inside the castle, they found themselves in the chef's store. Before they could be disgusted at the contents, they had to take care of the chef. They moved in step, a flawless dance of blood and vengeance. Neither knew that their own blood united them, but perhaps, just then, they felt it. They stood together in fellowship, the clans of the Ratdom. Here they would make their final assault. Reggie raised his sword and issued the cry. Charge, army of the mighty Paw! Emerging through the mist at the base of Mount Cauldron, Arlo came upon the king, locked in combat. Count Kazakh and his undead Sky Scorcher. Arlo rushed to his side. But again, he was too late. The Sky Scorcher was gone, flying to the summit with the king in its claws. The despair took hold. Just then, he heard his friends fighting on. He could not abandon them. He stood tall. He would be their captain now, and they would follow, even under the shadow of Dark Wings. Darkwing Smith, but the Smith's mighty hammer soon overpowered her. Darkwing Smith. The fiery heat in the heart of the mountain burned hotter than any forge. Rita moved, clutching to life. Arlo ordered Erica to take her to camp. He would continue alone. His whiskers twitched and crackled. There was dark magic here. Sky scorchers in cages, abominations made by some spell. The screeches of dying bats echoed through the corridors. He knew these arrows. It was Robin, determined to rescue his king. Slashing and arrows flying, they fought their way toward the summit. Would the king be alive when they got there? the huge throne room, they finally set eyes on the foul, laughing figure of Count Kazakh sat on his icy throne. Turtle kneeled exhausted before him. This pained the warden more than he could explain. Kazakh left his beast to fight them. He had a king to kill. Arlo and Robin fought with all they had, their hope driving them on. The beast fell, but there was no time to rest. Leaving Robin to tend to Bertle, Arlo headed to the summit to find Reggie. The icy wind bit at his fur as he emerged on the peak. He saw, silhouetted in the mist, Count Kazakh, and in his claws he held King Reggie, dangling over the edge. With a shriek of victory, the Count let go of the king and seemed to melt into the fatal mist. They flew into battle. The warden and the Count's weapons clashed, echoing across the mountain. Count's corrupted body fell heavy on the ground. Arlo rushed to the edge, calling for the king, but the only answer in the mist was the icy wind. The war was won, but Arlo could not feel the victory. He barely noticed his friends join him. The Fellowship bowed their heads in honor of their brave king. The tale of this war would be as much of loss as of winning.